And hello, everybody. Welcome to Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel. I am your host, Marshall, and I am here to talk about gaminess in Kriegsspiel. We'll see if we have some other people join. I put a link out for people to join us. Today happens to be December 24th, so it's basically Christmas Eve, which means, well, here it's Christmas Eve morning. It's 9 a.m. here on the Pacific Coast. But I know some of you, it's evening, and you probably are with your families celebrating with your loved ones. And I do want to say Merry Christmas to everybody out there who celebrates it. Happy Festivus for all of those who celebrate that. Happy Hanukkah for those who celebrated that just recently. I'm not sure when Eid falls, but it's kind of similar to some degree as I understand it. And of course, happy Eid to all of you who celebrate that, even though it is not the correct season. But I know that will come back around. It changes as I understand. But in any case, happy holidays to everyone. We care about all of you, and we're very happy to have you here participating in these events with us and kind of, having fun and, exploring the world of Kriegsspiel. Now, let's get on with our topic today, which is gaminess in Kriegsspiel. People like to play games and they like to win. Some people are very competitive and they can be toxic about it. Not only are they toxic about it, they can be very annoying. One of the problems that we run into is people will try, hang on, I'm trying to put my video on the Discord, and it won't work because StreamYard's using my camera, so you can only hear me here. But if you go to YouTube, you should see the event live streamed. You should see the podcast live streamed. In fact, I'm not gonna pull that up because I know it's working and I don't need to have it going in two places. I do see your comments. If you comment on the YouTube, it will pop up. I also posted an invite link to the podcast in general. So those of you who have something to contribute or say, you're welcome to come up on stage here and talk. Okay, so let's get back to gaminess. I think we all know what gaminess is, and it's the reason why when we play against experienced or seasoned players, we don't want to do it. It's because, we're going to be up against people who have played the game countless times. They know the rules and they know sort of the cadence of play. They know that in turn one, these are the optimum moves. They have their openings. They know the mid-game strategy and they know the late-game strategy of the game. And it's just not a lot of fun to play against a person who's just there to, basically spank you, if you will, across the game, and that's one of the problems that people get into when they get into Kriegsspiel is they bring that same mindset and they ask, where are the rules? I want to learn the rules. And they want to get their hands on a rule book and they want to read the rule book. And the reason they want to do that isn't just so they can play more proficiently, although there's something to that, right? They care enough for the community and the other players that they want to play competently, and that's appreciated. But there's also kind of a darker reason why people will ask for the rule book, and that is they want to figure out, is there some strategy I can employ that is permitted by the rules that will allow me to defeat my opponents? And that's a problem because that's not how it works in real life, because in real life, there are no rules. There's no rules in war. There are tactics, there are strategies, there are things that work, there are things that are very powerful and effective. You can employ deception and other things that you can do to gain an advantage over your opponent. And those things, of course, are generally allowed in Kriegsspiel because, again, Kriegsspiel is meant to simulate reality. And these are things that happen in reality. So you want to allow that in the Kriegsspiel event. However, somebody who says, but according to the rule book, I'm allowed to do this, therefore I want to do this every time, or whatever. Or when you allow people to form their units, and they're like, well, I'm just going to take all cavalry units because nobody's expecting to face off against all cavalry units, when that's actually kind of a ridiculous thing to do for a variety of reasons. You get people who do what's called min-maxing, and min-maxing is something that's kind of out of the Dungeons and Dragons world. It is something that comes from Kriegsspiel, in that Dungeons and Dragons evolved out of Kriegsspiel. And when we run our Kriegsspiel games, we like to kind of spice things up or put some variety into it. So we'll allow players to kind of choose their units, or do something so that they walk into battle with something that they've chosen, and they will try to min max or whatever. It's not typical, and it's not typical that we give players some sort of, I guess you could say, power to decide how powerful their units may or may not be, whatever. But sometimes it's allowed by some players, some umpires, some systems. I know I allow that in my K22 and K23 systems. I allow players to essentially build their formations. It's an optional rule. At the end of the day, you'll have players who are like, well, I'm going to take extra artillery, or I'm going to take all elite, or I'm going to take all militia, or whatever, and I'm just going to overwhelm the enemy. And they have some gamey tactic in mind. The problem with these things is, again, none of this is realistic. You have people who are like, well, I want to do this because I will win. But in reality, that scenario would never happen. In reality, you would not go to war with, enough militia to overwhelm the enemy, and that the militia is going to obey your orders and just human wave the enemy to death. What are we going to try to drown them in communism and blood or something? That's how you're going to kill the enemy, drowning them. No, it's ridiculous, right? But if the rules allow it, you will have players who say, but the rules allow me to do this, so you have to let me do it. The cool thing about Kriegsspiel is it's umpired by a human. And that's something that you're not going to get out of a computer. A computer cannot and will not break rules. It's one of the problems that we run into, for example, with the idea of self-driving cars. I'm looking forward to the day of self-driving cars. But there's a problem with self-driving cars, right? What company is going to program their self-driving car to break the law? What if the car has to decide, the AI of the car has to decide to either break the law or become, involved in some kind of an accident or unfortunate scenario? How do you solve that dilemma as a programmer? As a corporation, what decision do you make? Because there's liability in both situations. In Kriegspiel, just as in driving, the cool thing about driving is I know that if I have to choose between breaking the law or creating a situation that is unsafe or dangerous, I will break the law every time. I will cross over that double yellow line to go around an accident or something like that. There are scenarios where you will bend or break a rule or the law because the greater good demands it. And it's the same thing in gaming, and as an umpire in Kriegsspiel, you can break the rules. You can bend the rules, you can break them, you can change them, because the rules don't apply to you as the umpire. The rules are really, to quote Pirates of the Caribbean, they're sort of guidelines. And the idea is you have a human to say, well, the rule says this, and I know that you know that rule, and I know that you're expecting this. The problem is what you're doing is not particularly justifiable. It's not the sort of behavior that an officer of the period would engage in. They would not attempt this tactic. This tactic was something that was not used. It basically, maybe you're using something out of a modern tactic and you've adapted it somehow for Napoleonic warfare, but it simply wasn't used during that time period. And there may be a good reason why it wasn't used, or there might not be a good reason why it wasn't used, but whatever. You're going to get these guys who are going to come up with these off the wall, wacky solutions to problems. And on the one hand, you want to see some of that, right? Because it's great to see somebody kind of thinking outside of the box. But when their aim is simply to defeat the enemy and go home victorious, yeah, look at me, I'm smarter than everyone else, I won. It's not what you want. So as the umpire, you'll intervene in those cases. So what do you do when you have these hyper competitive players who just want to win at all costs? Set is dying on me. We'll just plug it in here. But one of the things that you do is you don't let them do that. You find a reason why that can't be done or why it won't be successful, and you enforce that. You can fudge a die roll. In fact, as people often say, Kriegsspiel is the land of fudge. And what that means is you can take a rule in Kriegsspiel and you can change it. You can take an outcome, a die roll, a result, and you can change it. Now, I don't encourage this all the time. I think by and large, you should follow the rules of the game. The rules are written for a reason. And I'm sure there are a lot of Prussian generals right now who are very angry with me, who are trying to claw their way out of their graves so they can come drag me down to hell because they're hearing me talk about breaking rules and just being an umpire and whatever. On the other hand, there may be some like Verdi Van Waw who would say, no, that's exactly it. You have to get away from the rules because the rules confine you and they don't allow you to create the most realistic scenario for the players. And if a player learns the rules, which is why we tend to keep the rules set secret from the players, then you end up in a situation where a player is gaming the rules, but they haven't actually learned anything. They haven't learned a lesson. They've simply learned how to work the system. And at the end of the day, that's the thing. That's what we're opposed to. We don't want people to learn how to beat the system. We want people to learn how to make good choices because it's the intelligent or right or appropriate thing to do. And that's what Kriegsspiel is all about. We see this in Star Trek, right? The most famous Kriegsspiel of all, the Kobayashi Maru. So if you're a fan of Star Trek, right, it's this hypothetical no-win scenario that all of the officer cadets are put through because Starfleet in this futuristic Star Trek world wants to see how a captain or an officer will respond when they are in a no-win situation. And the famous protagonist or hero, if you will, Captain Kirk, cheated. And he said, I don't believe in a no-win situation. So what he did was he cheated in the Kobayashi Maru to automatically win and, call it a day and go home. And of course, that created a problem, right? Because essentially what he did was he found a way to exploit the rules or the system or to reprogram it or whatever he did to beat the no-win scenario. And as a result of that, he didn't take the test. He didn't pass the test. The test is, what do you do when you can't win? When all you're going to do is lose? It's a character test. It is not, can you defeat the Klingons and save the helpless people in the derelict spaceship? It's, what is your character like? How does your character react when you are in a situation where you are simply doomed? You have made all the right decisions. You have made no mistakes, but guess what? You're still going to lose. What do you do? And that's the cool thing about Kriegsspiel is we get into these moral situations, these moral dilemmas. Again, it's not just about winning the event. It's about learning and picking up lessons along the way and growing and developing your skill set. Let's take a look here at some comments here. Merry Christmas from Lancer. Happy holidays to you, and Merry Christmas from Robert. Merry Christmas to you and as well. Lancer says definitions matter. I see gaminess as being the opposite effect from what you're talking about, where the game's rules prevent you from doing something that might be historically or arguably possible. And that's why I like Kriegsspiel, because again, you could say, this rule doesn't allow it, but it should be allowed, so I'm going to allow it as an umpire. So I agree with you here, Lance, that there are scenarios where it goes the other way, where the rules put a box around you and you're like, no, I should totally be allowed to do this because there's no physical or logical reason why not. May I do it? And what I would do in that case is, again, this is why umpired games are so cool, is you talk to the umpire about it. Unless you're in some professional setting where, no, you've got 3 seconds to give your order. What do you want to do? If you're playing casually and the umpire comes to you and, have a conversation with the umpire, express your intent to the umpire and say, don't spend 5 minutes doing it, but take 30 seconds to say, look, I think I should be able to do this. I would like to do this. May I do it? I do this all the time in games that I play, especially in the sci-fi realm. I'll come up with some quirky or clever tactic, and I will then go to my umpire and say, can I do this? And I leave it up to the umpire. The umpire might tell me no. They might think that's gamey, or they might think that that's not really, in line with the spirit of what we're doing here. And we don't do that here. And they'll tell me no. Or they'll say, you know what, that was a really clever thought. That's a good idea. I'm going to allow it. I've had that happen both ways. And that's okay. I think it's okay to explore these ideas. But at the end of the day, if the umpire's like, don't try that. No, that's outside the spirit of the game. Again, it's not just about winning. It's about learning it and growing and having a healthy experience that you benefit from, which is why I like what we do in the IKS. Now, again, if you're doing this professionally, if you're at the war, Army University or the War College, or you're at some think tank and you're putting on a Kriegsspiel because you really need to war game something out, or you really need to teach a specific lesson or something, I get that, right? You're not going to play around. You're not going to deviate. It's this or that, and that's all there is to it. I get it. But when you're playing for fun, and when you're playing for fun, you're not just playing for enjoyment. At least not me. You're also playing for enrichment. You're playing to learn more about yourself. You're playing to explore some ideas or concepts or whatever. And maybe you do want to try something because you want to explore it. You want to but what happens if I do this? What if somebody said to, the Germans, you can't go through the Ardennes forest. It's too densely forested. Well, that would have actually been great for the whole world, I imagine. But at the end of the day, somebody brought up the idea, and they advocated for it, and ultimately the plan was approved. And guess what it did? It brought them a battlefield victory. And there, that happens. But again, when someone's just trying to exploit the rules because all they want to do is win, 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 no. Let's take a look at some other stuff. Your Lancer says, what you're talking about is what I'd classify as a cutthroat play style. And yes, what I would say is, you don't want to be hyper competitive. In fact, I have a 2-player version of my rules. K22 and K23 can be played with 2 players. And I have a whole system where you're able to do it. Now, you lose some of the fog of war because there's no umpire to enforce fog of war. But that doesn't mean you can't have a cool and interesting 2-player game. And I've played 2-player games. And it's very simple. You write your orders down in advance. You write your orders in secret, and then you sit side by side and you resolve the orders together simultaneously. And as you're resolving the orders, the goal is not to, face crush my opponent. The goal is to interpret the orders logically and reasonably and kind of work it out. You're actually resolving the game together. You're co-umpiring the game, even though you're also players and you're against each other, but you co-umpire together as friends, as colleagues, as people who are trying to explore something and learn something. And you might say, hey, that's pretty cool. I might see my opponent starting to do something, and I'm like, oh, man, you're doing that. But, my commander avatar is here, and he would actually not know about that. And now I can't react to it, and I'm going to lose the battle. You're just going to smash me. But you know what? We're just going to play it out so that you can have your fun, and we see what happens when you sweep down on my flank undetected and you roll up my line. And we're going to let that happen, because even though there's no fog of war because we're umpiring together, I'm not going to cheat or break the rules. I'm going to just say, that was really clever of you. You did a good job. Let's see how it unfolds. Let's see if I can't stop you or react to it in some other way once my commander in the field learns about it or whatever. And that's the way to do this. Again, when you play games, you generally play games with friends, not with strangers and not with enemies. And it's cool to play with friends and to play almost cooperatively, even though you're on opposite sides, and to talk through the moves and the turns that you're making and say, I'm thinking about doing this. And the reason I want to do this is because. I even do that when I'm learning board games and I'm playing against people who played for a long time. I'll tell them, I'll say, this is the strategy that I want to use against you. Is this a viable option? So that way I learn how the game is played and I learn from it. And then at a certain point, we take the training wheels off, and I don't share my tactics, but we try to, work together to have a good game. And I'm blessed with good friends who will say, well, that's not a very good idea, because if you do that, this is going to happen. I have a card that can destroy that, or there's a card in the deck, or that's a really good idea because it's very hard for me to defend against it. Why don't you try that? And I'll say, okay, then yeah, I'm going to try that tactic on you. Let's see how it unfolds. That's fine. That's totally good and okay to do that. Let's see here. Canis says, and I like the name Canis there. Canis says, I like dogs. 858 says, Merry Christmas, or in Kriegsspiel origin language. Oh boy. Fro Weihnachten. Fro Weihnachten. Merry Christmas to y'all. Well, there you go. I probably butchered the German. I don't have a German accent, but I'm sure somebody will teach me the proper pronunciation of Merry Christmas in German. I know Feliz Navidad, which is Spanish, because I live in California. But there you have it. At the end of the day, if you're playing Kriegsspiel for fun, or any game at all for a good time, have fun doing it. If you're not having fun doing it, go play a different game. Don't play it. I even put that in my rule book. The purpose of this game is to have fun. If it isn't fun for you, don't play it. Play a different game. If you're going to be a jerk about it, if you're going to be hyper competitive, go play a different game. Don't play this game. Don't do it, because this isn't the space for that. The cool thing about Kriegsspiel is you can explore, and you gain some insights, and you learn about yourself. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity to do that. And you can sit down, just two people, and you can play Kriegsspiel. You write your orders in secret, you resolve them simultaneously, and you talk about, how it goes. You can critique each other, and you can just have a good time, and I advocate for that strongly. Now, again, this is different from the professional wargaming realm, where if you're doing this professionally because you're trying to teach a lesson, you got to stick to that playbook. It's not, your enemy is actually going to be your great teacher. You're going to learn everything from your enemy. And so you're going to let the enemy do what they're going to do. And you, as the opposing force, are going to just have to suffer that or react to it. And you're going to be allowed to do whatever. I think y'all get the picture there, right? I'm speaking in terms of casual gameplay for fun. But if you're playing for fun, that's it. There's no room for this gamey stuff. I really think you should play cooperatively and intelligently, justifiably. And just because the rules might allow it doesn't mean that you should do it. On the other hand, yes, you should be creative. And if you're not sure if this is the place to be creative in, or if this is the way to be creative, I encourage you to discuss it with your umpire. As an umpire, if you see players acting out in a certain way, punish the behavior, or don't allow it, or have a talk with the player and say, we don't do that here, or whatever it is. But get it ironed out so the game can continue and everybody benefits and has a good time, players and umpires alike. Let's see here. Lancer says, so where does a player who complains to the umpire that his opponent's actions are illegal, unfair, unrealistic fall, is that gamey in your opinion? If you're a crybaby, if you whine all the time, I don't want you to play in the game. I don't like that. As an umpire, though, you have to defend this player. You have to make sure that your players are not being victimized by somebody who has developed an exploit or a tactic or something. And I'm okay with coaching people a little bit, especially in a casual game. Coach them a little bit. If they're feeling overwhelmed, you don't want somebody to have a bad experience with the game. If somebody's feeling underwater or overwhelmed or whatever, and you're not on like a big time crunch or whatever, pause the game, talk to the player, counsel them, and say, okay, because you want them to stick with the game. You not only want them to finish the game that they're in, but you want them to come back and play more, because it is going to happen. You are going to have people who turn into, deer in the headlights kind of things. They just freeze up because they're so overwhelmed they don't know what to do. And you don't just let them founder in the deep end of the pool. You throw them a life preserver because you want them to come back and do this again and again. And so it's situational. if the opponent that they're up against is doing something that's just kind of not really in the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish, it's not really fun. They're just, they're just beating and kicking and stomping and they're like, yeah, because I can. Maybe you deal with that. A player who's having too much good luck, they need to have some bad luck. Otherwise, the game's not a challenge for them. And eventually they're going to get tired of it. It's kind of like the slot machine theory, right? The reason people play slot machines is because most of the time when they pull the lever, they lose. But they win every once in a while, and the win keeps them hungry and going for more. But interestingly, a person who pulls the lever and they only lose, they're going to stop playing after so many spins. But also interestingly, a person who wins every spin, they're actually going to stop. I get it, right? If you every time you pull the lever, you get $1 million, you're going to do it until your arm falls off. But the reality is, if you win every single time and then all of a sudden you lose, you're going to be like, oh, forget it, I'm done. So there is a science to it, and it's the same thing here. If you have a player who is always just dominating everybody, they're like, I'm a beast at Kriegsspiel, whatever. You want to make sure they have some exceptional challenges and they have some failures and some setbacks and some meatier and weightier problems to solve. Otherwise, they're going to get bored with the game and they're going to walk away and they're not going to benefit from it. Likewise, if somebody's on the other side and they're just getting pummeled, you might want to throw a little bit of good luck or something their way. And we've done that in games. Some ways that we've done that, it's not just fudging a die roll here and there. You might say, hey, a column of reinforcements have arrived, see what they do with that, also, though, it's also a situation where you're like, okay, you're right, you're going to lose, but can you lose well? How are you going to handle this defeat? How are you going to respond to this? Can you preserve the lives of your soldiers? Can you save your equipment? What can you do? Can you somehow find a way to lose less? That's challenge too. I mean, everybody who's played, a World War I or a World War II board game knows that if you play the Central or Axis powers, you're going to lose. But the way that you win in those games is by losing less than you would or later than you would have historically. And so you just kind of reframe the expectations a little, the victory conditions, so the players, don't see it as I'm just here to be a punching bag. No, you have a challenge. And yes, the challenge involves you losing on the map, but you can win in the Kriegsspiel if you do the right things. So here's your challenge. You just have a unique challenge, and let's see if you can rise to the occasion and solve it. That's why a lot of times when people when we declare winners of Kriegsspiels, and we have gotten away from doing this, but we used to declare winners in all of our events, winners would often come from the losing team. And it still happens. The person who played the best today was not on the winning side, but they played so well. So that's another way to approach it. Okay, let's see here. Ronan says, does assigning goals gamify the experience, or is it better to give players some guidance? Generally, there's goals. You have to get to a phase line. You have to take an objective. You have to do something. You have to defeat the enemy. You have to preserve your force. There's usually some sort of metric or goal that you're trying to achieve. Now, what I have done is sometimes I have given players too many goals. They can't realistically achieve all the goals. And so then they have to kind of prioritize and say, I can realistically do this and this, but I cannot do that. That's a bridge too far. But I'll try to make them do all of them. I'll tell them your orders are to do all of them. But in reality, they're just going to have to say, this is what I can do. And at this point, we're out of force and we're done. We can't do any better. We did the best we could. Bridge too far. Okay. And that's totally cool. That's just fine. I also think, yes, you should give some guidance to players, especially in a casual game. If it's a fast-moving game or a professional game, you're probably not going to give guidance. In fact, the guidance would have been given in the lessons that you taught prior to the Kriegsspiel, because the Kriegsspiel is like the exam. Obviously, during an exam, you don't really teach the lesson. However, I would say that, if you're taking an exam and you're just going to flunk the exam because you didn't study or you just didn't grasp the concept, that's probably a good occasion for the teacher to spend some one-on-one time with you and say, here's the lesson, here's how to solve this problem, whether it's a math problem or a Kriegsspiel problem. It's an opportunity to teach. So again, it's very situational, but I do think, yes, you have to give people goals. You have to give them a task and a purpose. And otherwise, what are they doing out there? They're just kind of floating out there like jellyfish in the ocean. You have to give them a task and a purpose for the game. Let's see here. Lance says exploratory tactics. I'm going to borrow the phrase. I like it. There you go. Flying Falcon says Kriegsspiel is the home of fudge. At first, it can be towards a lesson, and as situations develop, the game itself becomes Kriegsspiel for the Empire. Yes, I really like that, because this is something I've talked about before, is that there are Kriegsspiel problems for the players, and then there are Kriegsspiel problems for the umpires. Umpires have to solve problems too, and in fact, as part of the master umpire credential process, one of the things that you have to demonstrate to earn your master umpire credential is that you can think through and solve problems on the fly as they arise, because there will be problems. There will be problems in the scenario. There will be problems because you're going to have a scenario that is based on two players doing this, and you're going to have one player do this and the other player is going to do that. What do you do then? I've had it happen countless times. The players will break the scenario because they don't behave logically or in a manner that you reasonably expect. What do you do then? How do you put the game back on track? So yeah, absolutely. Kriegsspiel problems do exist for the umpires as well. And I really like that. That's a really cool comment, Flying Falcon 11. That's really a thing. Let's see here. Candace says, I think it's a dumb question, but was the Battle of Mekelle played in the friendly or the more serious approach? Because to me, the players seemed very serious. Now, I was not in this event, so I don't know. I was not a participant and I did not umpire. I know that we ran this event recently, and I know there's some videos on that. The players may be very serious in their approach, but we're also very friendly. And we're also all, in the IKS, we're all about being friendly. I mean, look at our little logo here, right? We got the little Pride logo and the Derby House Principal logo. We're very inclusive. Friendliness, gentle personliness is one of our hallmarks. It's a big deal in our organization. We have like a big, long rule list about that. And we don't usually have problems with people being rude or impolite, but sometimes a little over competitive. But yeah, even though the players are serious, it may be because the time limitations of the game, and the umpire's like, we got to get through this in like 4 hours or 5 hours. And you want to get through at least maybe a dozen turns so that you have enough opportunity to unfold a strategy and spring something on your opponent. Both sides want to play through at least 9 to a dozen turns to 18 turns in a game. That's a pretty good sized game. And players can be very serious when they engage with that, but that doesn't mean they're not friendly. And after every game, there's usually a post-game debrief and discussion, and you see a lot of that friendliness come out, and the players will talk to each other about what happened. All right, Candace says, but I have to admit that I'm very new to Kriegsspiel as a game and not a training. And yeah, we do play it as a game, but there is a learning component, and that's why the umpires will always give a post-battle debrief and critique. And they usually, if the game is not too large, they will allow the players to talk about their experience. So there's sort of this round table or a seminar that happens. And again, it's very friendly, it's constructive. There will be criticism, but again, it should be framed as constructive criticism, pointing out first what you did right, and then a place where you can improve, or where you went wrong, or where things kind of went sideways for you. And sometimes things go sideways because of luck, but a lot of times things go sideways because you made a choice. And you made a choice, and it was a wrong choice. Why did you make the wrong choice? Well, maybe you didn't have all the information, or maybe you made an assumption. But that's just part of the learning of it, Flying Falcon says, I like to say life is but a Kriegsspiel. Given an objective, a goal taken seriously, even a retreat is a win. Yes. And again, we need more games that actually teach people how to retreat. We did run a game last summer called Battle of the Broken Column. The players felt it was a disaster. I actually think it went kind of well. But yeah, it was a retreat scenario. And players just have a hard time with those types of scenarios because they're going to lose by default, and they don't always like that. But again, there's lessons to be learned there. You can learn how to lose less by practicing losing, which in turn allows you to win more later. Hey, it's AV. Well, good to see you, AV. Good to see you. All right. And I like airplanes and stuff too. So Flying Falcon, there you go. F-16. I love the F-16. In a way, as well as the lessons from Kriegsspiel spill into real life, given an issue which means, do I have to achieve the end? If you don't have the means, maybe it's time to retreat, focus, and find the means to an end. And yeah, that's right. It's exactly it. Again, in Kriegsspiel, you learn about yourself. That's why I like the role play element in Kriegsspiel, because you get to role play and really kind of explore your character and what kind of a person am I? What kind of a commander am I? Do I like taking gambles and risks? Do I follow orders to the letter? Do I kind of, push back on my superiors? Do I blame my subordinates? What do I do? How do I respond to winning or to losing or whatever? It's a fantastic way to learn about yourself. And you might not always like the answers. I know I've come up with some answers that, wow, I don't like that answer. I don't like how I was. I don't like that. Then you have an opportunity, because now you're aware, to change, to make a change, to make your conscious effort to play differently. For example, I'll give you one specific example before we wrap up here. Is at one point in time, early on, I would kind of do whatever I wanted. I didn't just straight break orders, but I would really bend the rules, and I was kind of a maverick. And I ended up getting my hat handed to me time and time again. And I realized maybe this isn't the way to be. Maybe I don't like the fact that I push the boundaries or that I'm such a maverick. Maybe I need to be a little bit more in the box. Everybody's so busy trying to think outside the box. Well, what happens if I stay in the box? Well, guess what? I'm more successful. And if my side loses, they can't point the blame at me because I was on my assignment. So now as I play, because I learned this about myself and I wasn't comfortable with the answer, I now tend to play a lot more by my orders. I follow my orders. I don't go off script. So I learned and I grew and I developed, and I think it's for the best. So absolutely. Absolutely. All right. Diallo, good to see you. There we go. And that's kind of all I have for today. I hope that you were able to pull some gems out of this. I'm kind of shooting from the hip today. Got a lot going on. Like I said, it's the day before Christmas. Tomorrow's Christmas. I hope you all have a very happy holiday. Those of you who celebrate it. Those of you who do not celebrate it, hey, maybe hopefully at least you got the day off. And for all of you, regardless of whether you celebrate or not, I hope that you're having a fantastic season. Winter has arrived in the Northern Hemisphere, summer in the Southern Hemisphere. So I hope that you have good things ahead in this season. Thank you, Lancer, for the compliment, and all of you who are here. Thank you all for your questions. Your questions really help the podcast to flow organically, because that's what I like to do. I like to take your questions and answer them. I prefer that rather than me just kind of rambling for 30 minutes. So yes, I welcome your questions, and please, if you view this in the future, feel free to post questions in the future. If I see the questions come through the YouTube chat later, I'll get the notification. I'll try to answer them for you as well there. Well, that's all we have for today. So thank you. Have a happy Christmas, happy season, happy New Year, and all that. And we will see you on our next adventure. Goodbye for now.